Today with me on the show is Marjolein Groot Nibbelink, the head researcher of the Nimdzi 100 report. Marjolein, welcome on the show.
Thank you so much for being here for the first time.
So this report is about to go live, and we want to have a preview of what you have found so far and why it matters for LSPs around the world, what the 100 biggest companies in our industry are doing right now.
Yeah, it's a good question, and a question that I actually love getting and I like answering, because yes, the brand name of the report is the Nimdzi 100. The most visible and the most viewed part of the report is the list of the 100 largest companies. The rest is a real in-depth look at the language industry. And this year, for the first time, we are making it the language industry as a whole. And so we create a look at the market, we create a look at the economy, at global politics, we look at M&A. So for anyone, both on the buyer and the provider side, and especially for investors, it's super interesting to see how who you're talking to or who you are benchmarks against the rest of the industry. So,
Okay.
and then last year, the first thing we did, or for the very first time, we created a mid-market report as well. So we looked specifically at the mid-market players, which is super interesting because then you get to compare against the 100 largest, right? You can see a difference in optimism. First of all, like none of the 100 largest LSPs are based in Africa. But then in the mid-market, it's about 1%. And
Wow.
we get more and more insights from those regions, Southeast Asia, Africa, South America, the more smaller and mid-sized companies are joining the survey. And so the survey is open until the 20th of February. Really want to encourage people to take it. And then if I look at optimism, this is from last year's report, by the way. We have business expectations from the top 100 companies last year. And we had a 55% positive outlook into next year.
Wow. That's
And then,
quite a lot.
yes, in the mid-market range, it's 47%. And you had 18% looking at it with a kind of a downward look. So, and only 6% said the
Mhm.
same thing in the top 100 companies. So there is a little bit of a difference there. But then when you look at M&A, for example, most of the M&A activity is in the mid-market range. So you see a lot of consolidation
Absolutely.
in mid-market, which then creates a more competitive position for them with that like top 50 range. Because within that top 50 range, there's a ton of changing and shifting. And so those things are super interesting to compare.
Let me ask you a little bit about the findings, because you already mentioned there are some preliminary findings from the report, some stats you have triggered out. What caught your attention? What surprised you most of what you have seen so far?
Yeah, I would say we have about half of the data that I would like to have to make a really comprehensive report. And we always see this great disparity between like existential dread and absolute positivity. And what came through to me most is that last year around this time, people were freaking out in general. They're just panicking about this pressure from their clients to adopt AI, or themselves
Right.
understanding that they needed to integrate this technology some way, either in their workflow or in their offerings. And then this year, people are way more positive. They have been able to basically to control the beast and they've been able to put it in a space in their company, right? Like it's like this wild horse just ran into their office and they're like, oh my God, what do I do with this? And they've been able to talk to it and rein it in and give it a direction. So
Mhm.
they're feeding that
More
horse,
control.
starting to ride it. So it's becoming a tool right now rather than a threat.
So what trends are you seeing? Are we changing the model in the industry?
There's still room for traditional linguism. Absolutely. The most steadily growing sector of the language industry is interpreting, and interpreting is inherently based on human skills, especially in those situations in the verticals that are also traditionally the greatest, which is medical, so life sciences, legal, government, regulated industries. And because of those regulations and those high standards and the high stakes, especially in life sciences, human skills are still extremely valuable. The prices for that are going up, the margins are great. So human linguism has a
I know.
place. Is it shifting within traditional translation? Absolutely. Language services are more and more demanding a skill set from their people that incorporates both linguistic capabilities and an understanding of technology.
Right, right. This year has been very intense in terms of exchange rates as well. Are you asking these kind of questions? Are you going into the basics of how international trade is doing right now?
Yeah, we have a whole chapter on economics. Definitely huge changes. The tariffs have had tremendous effect on how much demand there is for translation in, say, automotive, leisure, government NGOs. So those are down. And then manufacturing. I've heard reports of people losing enormous contracts in military. So even though they lose them in like international military investment, you know that within Europe, there is a real drive right now to hire within Europe. So companies are looking to spend their money within Europe. Also, because the exchange rate between the euro and the dollar are they're really driving some people and the politics as well, right? Like stay on your side of the pond basically. And then if you add to that the commitment of NATO to invest a ton in infrastructure within the European mainland, infrastructure and military, there are tons of opportunities there. The greatest bulk of the money in our industry is spent within Europe and the United States. And there's like about a 20%, would you say, drop in the value of the dollar versus the euro.
Yep.
So it's difficult for European companies right now.
Especially if you got paid in one currency and then you have to pay in another currency. That makes them
Right.
very difficult these years.
We're getting paid by like big tech companies on the West Coast of the United States, and they have
In
translators in
US
Europe. They
dollars.
have their tech people in Europe. And so they're charging the same because that's what we're seeing. More than 80% of companies are saying they're not planning to change their prices.
Right,
And only a very small, I think it's 7 or 6% are planning to drop their prices next year. So
right.
so prices are steady, whereas last year people were trying to drop their prices more in order to stay competitive. It means a lower margin for those European companies that are doing business in the United States. But on the bottom line, we report everything in dollars. So if people are reporting in Chinese currency, in Indian or in European currency, we take the average exchange rate over the year and we report everything in US dollars so that it looks the same.
Mhm.
So really it won't look different. Like the size of their company isn't less. It's just that their bottom line, their profit margin is down.
Yeah. Marjolein, in terms of technology, what do you see in terminology and technology shifts? So LLMs are on the rise, MTPE, machine translation, post editing with AI embedded. What is the scope in 2026? What people have to look at?
Yeah, MTPE and MTQE are both rising as a service. The demand is up, the margins are up. That's where a lot of money is. So that's again where having linguists that also understand how to use the technology or even like what they're getting, if they are getting something that was processed with an MT engine, what they're getting and how they should interact with it. That's very, very useful skill to develop. What is in waiting now is the volumes aren't up in the same degree to the
Mhm.
capabilities that the industry has with these LLMs, right? So
Why is
so
it?
so you have your buyers that are saying, "Okay, we wanna buy the same stuff at a lower rate," but
Right.
the providers are by now able to say, "Hey, we can take so much more content so that we can employ the same amount of people," right? So there's a bit of an adjustment there, but I think it's catching on, right? That's going to level out. So as an industry, we need to make sure that we express that towards our clients.
So what you say is we are bad in communicating this capacity, this new capacity we are gaining in developing more content, localized content in multiple languages. and that the buyers on the other side are still like resistant to opt in. Why do you think is this happening?
There's an inherent hesitation to spend money on translation because it's never clear to a buyer what value that's getting them, right? It's a service. It's a service they're providing. And so if they can get away with paying less for it, they always will try to do that. Yes, one of the greatest challenges that we are not that visible. We're the behind the scenes people. And people, the buyers don't realize it, but within business, within those buyers that we're trying to target, that we're trying to get the money from, they're not understanding it either, like how big this is. Unfortunately, there are places to express those developments, and one of them is Multilingual Magazine, of which I was the publisher for a while.
Absolutely.
So, but that too has a hard time to break outside of our industry. So we're really living in a bit of an echo chamber. And that's one of the reasons why we do this report as well, and why it's available for free. So you can get it and show it to your client. You can show it, a venture capital investor. You can show it anywhere you want and share it for free, so people understand how big this industry is, what its challenges are, and what its capabilities are. And that's the important thing. Like, we're focusing very much on challenges, but like, we have these capabilities and they're expanding tremendously right now. And I don't think that the market is that aware of it.
Absolutely. So this is why we're here. This is why we are podcasting, YouTubing, and all this stuff, to bring out the capacity to show others how this works. And the Nimdzi 100 report, I think it's a great tool for everybody to get an insight in what's happening. And as Marjolein just said, this is your time still to enter the report, to fill it out, and contribute with your part of the global puzzle we're seeing here. When is it planned to get published?
Yeah,
That
question. So we have the survey is open till the 20th, and then we start crushing all the data. Then we get all the graphics, and we see all the we can really get a visual of what we got, and then we start writing, and that takes a while. So the end of March.
Okay. So guys, you have heard it. Follow Marjolein on LinkedIn, the website nimdzi.com. We have it in the show notes below, and very much looking forward to see what you have taken out of that.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
a lot.